Okay, thank you, Mike. So I'm Rick Felling. I've been a member here since July of this year. And I recently retired from the Nevada Division of Water Resources, where I was a hydrogeologist and deputy administrator. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about the Hidden Valley Country Club's water rights, go through an overview of Nevada water law, go through some definitions that I'll be using throughout the presentation, and then discuss our water rights, the history, their current status, and how they all tie together, the supplemental nature. And then at the end, I have a few recommendations on how to proceed with our water rights and whatever the strategic plan might be for the country club. So I'll start basic tenets for Nevada water law. All sources of water, whether above or below the surface, belong to the public. And one cannot use a water source and use it in any way unless they get a water right from the state engineer. We practice the prior appropriation doctrine, and that is first in time, first in right. All of the western states practice that doctrine to some extent. And you can understand why when there's a source of water, and when this area was settled, the sources were streams. So the first person to use that water, they got the right. The guy that came next, he got the right the second right. He couldn't use the right to damage the first guy's right. So first in time, first in right. Beneficial use is the basis and the measure of the water. So all waters used in the state have to be used for beneficial purpose and not otherwise. You could not, for instance, acquire a water right with the intent to simply make money and sell it. There has to be a beneficial use associated with it. And then use it or lose it. We've all heard that as a basic tenet of Nevada water law. So I'll go through the appropriation process. This is a state process to acquire a water right. The appropriation process applies to any new application for a new water right or for any change application. So anytime you do any change to your water right, you have to go through this process from top to bottom. You file an application with the state engineer's office. They publish it in a local paper for 4 weeks, and 30 days after that, there's an opportunity for anybody that doesn't like that application or change application for any reason, they can file a protest to that application. The state engineer decides if he needs to hold a hearing. He doesn't have to, but if he needs to hold a hearing, he'll hold a hearing, and then he'll issue a decision. He'll either approve or deny the application. For an application that's approved, there's a few steps that need to be taken before that water right can be certificated. First is the proof of completion, and what that is pretty straightforward. If, let's say, the water right's an underground right, it's underground groundwater, that's the same. The proof of completion would be the party would have to go out and drill a well. That's proof of completion. If it was a surface water right, they'd have to put in the works of diversion to divert the water from the Truckee River, say, to the place of use. Following the proof of completion, and once that's done, that has to be filed with the state engineer, then proof of beneficial use. So proof of beneficial use is demonstrating that you actually diverted the water. If it's a well, you measured it. You ran it through a meter and you measured every gallon that went through that meter, and you were able to document how much was used and where it was used. And you file that with the state engineer. If he agrees and he approves it, then that water right is certificated. That is where every water right needs to be. Now the country club has several certificated rights, but it has some that aren't yet certificated. And then use it or lose it. If you don't use your water, you can be subject to cancellation, forfeiture, or abandonment. And then we have vested claims. Now this is the adjudication process, which is different than the appropriation process. All the Truckee River rights, they went through the adjudication process. These water rights were used before there was ever a state engineer's office. There were no statutes that dealt with how water could be used in the state. They're pre-statutory claims. Once they're adjudicated, then they're rights. They're water rights. And in the case of the Truckee River Decree, it's the Truckee River Decree rights. So how can one lose a water right? So the first way one can lose a water right, I'm going to back up real quick. In this appropriation process, one needs to file a proof of completion or a proof of beneficial use, but if they don't file that, they can always file for an extension of time to complete those proofs. So for a permit, only for permits, only permits can be canceled. And they can be canceled for failure to file your proof of completion or your proof of beneficial use, or for failure to file extensions of time. So the golf course's underground rights, we have 2 underground rights. Those are both permits. Proof of completions have been filed because those water rights are in this well out here. But beneficial use has not been filed. So every year we file an extension of time for the proof of beneficial use. Now, as of 2017, an extension can be filed every 5 years. So I would recommend that the club do that. They file a 5-year extension of time for proof of beneficial use for those underground water rights. If a party fails to file the proof of completion, proof of beneficial use, or fails to file an extension of time, then those water rights will get canceled by the state engineer. If a party has a water right canceled, so if we had our water right canceled, we forgot to file the proof of, or the extension of time, it could be canceled. Then you go to the state engineer and you request a hearing on your cancellation. And for any good cause shown, typically they will rescind that cancellation and you'll get your water right back. But you lose your priority. So our water right is a very senior priority in the 1940s. If it were canceled in 2019, it would then be a 2019 priority, the youngest water right. And because priority is important, you don't want that to happen to your water right. Then we have forfeiture. And forfeiture is just for certificated underground rights. Now, we don't have any certificated underground rights, but we used to. Forfeiture occurs when you fail to use your water for 5 consecutive years, and you fail to file an extension of time. Currently, as of 2017, the state engineer is required to send a letter to every certificated water right to tell them that they have 1 year to either put the water to use or to file an extension. But that wasn't always the case. And in 2012, the state engineer found that the water right 5436, our most senior right, hadn't been used for 5 consecutive years at that time because really they couldn't find where the well was and there was a house where it was supposed to be. So they found that it hadn't been used for 5 years. At the time, there was no law that required that they send us a letter to give us a year to put it back to use. So they finally got around to sending us a letter in 2016, and they forfeited that underground right in 2016, and it was a 1919 priority. It was a very senior right. The state engineer could grant extensions, any number of extensions, each one not more than a year. And I'll talk about that senior underground right, 5436, a little bit more. And finally, there's abandonment. Any water right can be lost through abandonment, but it's a very difficult process to lose a water right. It has to be demonstrated that there's been 10 years when you didn't use your water, you didn't pay any assessment fees, you didn't do anything with the water right, and there's a high burden of proof, and it's on the party trying to get that water right abandoned. It is rarely pursued by the state engineer. The last time I'm aware of was 2 or 3 years ago. There was a rancher out in Humboldt County that was walking around on a new parcel that he acquired, and he found an old well casing, and he found some equipment, and the equipment dated back to the 1930s. That's pre-statutory for that type of water right. So he filed a claim for a vested claim for that right. He said this is a pre-statutory right. It's been here since the 1930s. The state engineer declined to grant that. He decided, no, that's not a valid right. You haven't used that. It hadn't been used in 60 years. And it went to district court, and the district court upheld the rancher, and he says, well, you know what, we're not going to abandon that right. And so this guy got the right for, maybe 1,000 acre feet of groundwater. It's a tough process, and the state engineer hardly ever pursues it. So now let's talk about some definitions. So we'll talk about duty. Duty is the amount of water that can be used by any water right over the course of either the irrigation season or the year. And it's measured in acre feet. Then acre feet, an acre foot is 325,851 gallons. It'll cover an acre of land with 1 foot of water, pretty straightforward. But a good way to remember this, there's 3 acre feet in 1 million gallons. And 1 million gallons is what this golf course uses on a daily basis in the summer. So, well, it seems like a lot, but it's a big golf course, so it's less than I thought. Then diversion rate, and that's the rate that one can actually divert the water from its source. So if it's a well, how much water can you pump out of the well? If it's from a ditch or canal, how much can you divert into the ditch or the canal? And that's typically measured in cubic feet per second, and it is, or gallons per minute, but for all the golf courses, right, it's in cubic feet per second. Then we have priority. A priority is important for all of our water rights. And it's the date of the first filing of the base right. And you'll see that a lot of our water rights were filed a long time ago, and they've had multiple changes since then. And each time it's changed, it changes the place of use or the point of diversion or how that water is to be used. It doesn't lose its priority. Its priority is maintained through all of those changes. If it was used before state water law, it's pre-statutory right, then its priority is the date it was first used. So for instance, our Truckee River decree rights, they're all 1860s and 1870s. They were used before Nevada water law. And then I want to just mention supplemental right. Most of the golf course's rights are supplemental to each other. And a supplemental right is simply when you have one water right that has the same place of use as another water right. They cover the same acreage. So one supplements another. And our water rights are one on top of another, on top of another, on top of another. And I'm going to show you on some maps where all of them are. They differ by a little bit, but they're all supplemental to each other. A key point here is that when you have supplemental rights, you end up with what they call a total combined duty. So if you have a surface water right that gives you 4 acre feet per acre, and a groundwater right that gives you 4 acre feet per acre, and a decree right that gives you 4 acre feet per acre, you add it all up and you have 4 acre feet per acre. You don't have 12. That's a key point here. And I'll just tell you how supplemental rights came to be. You know, we live in Nevada, 2 years out of every 3 are dry. Before we had reservoirs, most of the water use was surface water. It was the Truckee River, the Carson River, the Walker River, and those rivers always dried up in the summer. There weren't reservoirs. It's snowpack. The snow melts off July and August. Those streams are drying up. Well, these guys all had water rights, all these farmers, and they wanted to get their crop finished, whether they were growing alfalfa or a cash crop. So they got a supplemental underground right. So when their surface water right ran out, they can turn on the pumps and irrigate their crop for the rest of the season. So I'm going to go through this table, and nobody can read it. That's why we have the handout, and I'll take a little bit of time. And I'll go through what the headers are, and I'll go through what the different rows are. So this is a hydrographic abstract that I downloaded from the state engineer's office, and then I made a number of changes to it to just show what we want to show. So I'll start on the left, that's application number. So when an application is filed at the state engineer's office, it gets an application number. If it turns into a permit, it keeps the same number. If it gets denied, that number never gets used again. So it keeps this number forever until it gets changed. Then I show in the second column a change of application, and you can see that there are several of these that are changes. So for instance, this Steamboat Creek right, and what I'm showing here on the top row of each of these blocks is the current right, and on the bottom as the initial filing. So this was changed once, twice, 3 times to where it is today. It had 3 change applications. Then I have priority date. I have, hard to read, filing date, the certification number, and the date it was certificated. Then I have application status, and there are three abbreviations here. The first one, FOR, that's forfeit. The next one down is permit, and then we have ABR, and that's abrogated. So it was changed by something, so abrogated. So we have permit, certificated, and abrogated water rights, and then the forfeited right. Then we have a diversion rate, and that's in cubic feet per second. We have the duty in acre feet, and we have the number of acres that could be irrigated with that water right. The use of each right, whether it be recreation or irrigation, and they all started as irrigation and they changed to recreation, whether or not it is supplemental to another right. And in this sheet, only the groundwater is listed as supplemental, but in reality, they're all supplemental to each other. Then the period of use. When can you use that water right? Not all water rights can be used on January 1st. Some are just allowed to be used during the irrigation season. The source, we have underground and stream. And then, what is the source description? And in this case, it's the Miraloma well. So now I'll talk about this water right. This is 5436. It was filed in 1919, and it was filed to irrigate 89 acres, and that acreage is right down here. So here's the golf course, and it's a little bit tough to see, but this is the entire golf course. This is West Hidden Valley Drive, and this is Miraloma that comes out here and goes off to the west. This star here, that's the point of diversion. That's where the well was at some point in time. There was a well out there, and it was used to irrigate 89 acres right down here in the southwest part of the golf course. It was certificated in 1932, 379 acre feet, 89 acres. And it was, like I said, it was forfeit in 2016. The next block I'm going to talk about are the Steamboat Creek rights. So this right was filed for just 2 months after the underground right, just 2 months after it. And it was filed initially to irrigate 500 acres in the area of the golf course, but it has been changed 3 times, so that currently, let me go a little bit slower. Initially it was filed to irrigate 500 acres, but then it was certificated in 1932, the same time as this right, to irrigate just 89 acres. And the water right was set at 379 acre feet, 4 acre feet per acre, which is the duty for almost all the water rights in northern Nevada, 4 acre feet per acre. It was then changed again to irrigate 446 acres, but it was still just 379 acre feet. So 379 acre feet isn't enough to irrigate 446 acres, but that was the new place of use, and it was certificated. All these 3 changes were certificated. Currently, it irrigates just 137.4 acres, and this is the place of use of the Steamboat Creek certificated water right. You can see the golf course clearly. You can see all of the fairways. They're very, very clearly identified. It doesn't get into the rough too much. It was certificated in 1982, 379 acre feet, 137.4 acres. And we'll see both those numbers again. But I want to point out, this is the point of diversion for the Steamboat Creek right. So this is Steamboat Creek. It flows from southwest to northeast. Pembroke sits right here. The Boynton Slough flows right through here, up through here, and right out, and it flows into Steamboat Creek right here. So this is the Boynton Slough point of diversion right here. This is what we call Pond B. This is Steamboat Creek. So the other water rights, the Truckee River and the Boynton Slough point of diversion, they're right here. Steamboat Creek is right here. When this right was first certificated in 1932, it was for the same 89 acres. as this underground right. They were certificated at the same time, 1932, but like I said, one's lost. So now I'll talk about the Boynton Slough right. It's another very senior right, but with respect to the Truckee River rights, they're not that new. The Boynton Slough right was generated from drains to the Hubbard Field, which is now the Reno Tahoe Airport. So they dug these deep trenches to drain water away so that the land would be dry, and that the water flowed into these drains and flowed to the east, down the gradient of the valley, and into the Boynton Slough. At the time, the state engineer called them underground water, and it's important because if it's an underground right, then it might be supplemental to something else, but your other underground water right might not be supplemental to that. I'll talk about that more. It's confusing, but that's something that we're going to get an opinion on from the state engineer. So it was filed in 1947. There's only been one change. Initially, it irrigated 1,700 acres, and it was for 446 acre feet. Currently, it's certificated for 1,032 acre feet, and it irrigates 258 acres. And you can see this is the place of use of this water right. This is the water that the golf course uses almost exclusively, along with the Truckee River right. This is our main supply of water. And you can see the place of use includes all of the golf course, all of these little subdivisions. It just includes everything. Lots of places that really won't get any water because there's no way to deliver that water, and they don't, somebody else owns the land. But this is the place of use for the Boynton Slough. It's more than enough to irrigate the entire golf course. It has a diversion rate of 3 cubic feet per second, and that's important, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Now we have our 2 underground rights. These water rights were filed and certificated one time, or they were filed in 1957, and they were certificated in 1965. And they were both certificated at the same time to irrigate 837 acre feet and to irrigate 209 acres. So they were certificated. Then they were moved. They were originally filed, and the wells were right out here east of the clubhouse, and then they were moved to new points of diversion out between McCarran and Longley, just south of Rock Boulevard. And they were moved there because the water was of poor quality. Then the idea was move the water there, put it in a new well, and then if we needed it, pump it into the Boynton Slough, flows down, and we can take it out at our Boynton Slough point of diversion. And that was a good idea. The airport owned that land, and for one reason or another, and I'm not quite sure how it happened, but the airport said, we're gonna develop that. You need to take your well off, sorry. And the water rights were moved back here, and they reside out here in this well out here now. So right now, they are permits. They're permits for 815 acre feet, and they're each 203.79 acres. So they're each 815 acre feet, and you add them together, and you get 815 acre feet. That's how that works. So you can see here the place of use of the underground rights. The point of diversion is right there. So they irrigate more than the Steamboat Creek right, because you can see here it only goes to the edge of the fairway. Here it covers more, but not quite as much as the Boynton Slough. So this is 258 acres. This one is 203.78 acres. Both of these underground rights are clearly supplemental to the Steamboat Creek right. And so we've had a decision by the state engineer that that is absolutely the case. They came on later, Steamboat was there. It's not clear if they're supplemental to the Boynton Slough, because the Boynton Slough originally was thought to be groundwater. Now it's recognized that it's not groundwater, it's what they call other surface water, which is just surface water. So we've asked the state engineer to get an opinion on that, and he agreed. So lastly, we have the Truckee River decree rights. You can see that each of these water rights, 25, 848, 849, and 850, were a change of these waters that say, for instance, 179.5 DTR. DTR is Decree Truckee River. You can see their priorities range from 1865 to 1876. Obviously, that's very senior, but with respect to the Truckee River Decree, it's medium priority. They're not that senior. Nevertheless, we get their water unless there's a pretty serious drought on the Truckee River. They were acquired in 1970, and they were certificated in 1976. So those rights were decree rights. They went through the state process, an application, proof of completion, proof of beneficial use, and were certificated in 1976. So they're decree rights, but since they were moved, they had to use the state process. Together, the three of them, so the diversion rate is, it totals 0.995 cubic feet per second. So call it 1 cubic feet per second. And the duty totals 210.9 acre feet. So those are the senior Truckee River rights. They were acquired in 1970, and I'm assuming that it was thought that the golf course needed more water, so they went out and got more water, and they had it delivered to the golf course. So the place of use of these rights are the same 379 or 137 acres as the Steamboat Creek right. It's the very same 137 acres. They use the same map, but it's 210 acre feet for 137 acres. So all by itself, it's not quite enough to irrigate that 137 acres. You need 3 or 4 acre feet per acre to irrigate the golf course. But its point of diversion is clear out here at Wingfield Park. So this is I-80, this is 395. And this is the route of our 1 cubic foot per second of water from Wingfield Park. It flows into the Cochrane Ditch, it flows down to Virginia Lake, and it goes into the Glory Hole. From there it goes in an open channel, and underground it flows underneath the airport, and it comes out just northwest of Brookside, the Brookside Park. And if you drive down Rock Boulevard, you'll see this big canal that's between Rock Boulevard and Brookside. So that is our water right, and then it continues to flow south. It flows just north of, it intersects with Dry Creek and the Humboldt Slough here on Longley Lane. It flows down across Miralone Park and flows back into the Boynton Slough up here, and it's taken out from the Boynton Slough right in here. So that's 1 cubic feet per second, and it flows all the way across the valley. And there's not any other water put into this diversion, and we were worried that, is that water really making it to the golf course? And we went and met with the federal water master and talked about it, and he assured us that in fact it does make it makes it all the way across the valley. So we were talking about what would happen if we didn't have that 1 cubic feet per second? Because obviously the club's been talking about selling the decree right. What would happen if you lost that 1 cubic foot per second of the Truckee River Decree? It's probably the most valuable water right that the golf course has. Well, one thing we need to know is, well, how much water is in the Boynton Slough? So this is Steamboat Creek. Here's the Boynton Slough, and here's our points of diversion. There is no gauge on Boynton Slough. There's no gauge on it at all. But we do have Steamboat Creek, and there's a gauge down here near the Huffacre Hills at Short Lane. And it's been going nonstop since 2000. And then there's a gauge up here at Clean Water Way. So we have 2 gauges on Steamboat Creek for the same period of record, for the same 2000 to 2018. Flowing into Steamboat Creek along this reach is really just the Boynton Slough. There's really nothing else that flows in that has any volume. There's a little bit of water that seeps in. There's some water that comes out. Our diversion comes out. But for the most part, with respect to the scale of these flows, one can estimate the flow of Boynton Slough by taking the flow here at Clean Water Way and subtracting Short Lane. So that's what I did. So I'm a hydrologist. I look at hydrographs a lot. They can get really confusing, so just bear with me, and I'll try to keep it as simple as I can. So this is a hydrograph of Steamboat Creek at Short Lane. Each one of these labels is a year. So this is June of 2010, or June of 2000, June of 2001, June of 2002. And there's 12 points between each of these grid ticks. And that's the monthly average flow in cubic feet per second. So that's the rate of flow averaged over the course of the month in cubic feet per second. And there's a scale here. It goes from 0 to 100. So you can tell that at Short Lane, the flow of Steamboat Creek, except for the wet years when we have some flooding, it ranges between 3 and 4 CFS, maybe up to 15 CFS. So that's the flow of Steamboat at Short Lane. If we look at the flow of Steamboat at Clean Water Way, we can see that it's quite a bit more. And it ranges from 15 to, really 20 to 40 cubic feet per second. Pretty consistently. It has some dry periods and some wet periods, but pretty much what you're looking for is consistent flow. So here's what I did. For each one of these, between each one of these grid ticks, there's a data point for every month. Now this starts in October of 2000 and it ends in November of 2018, so it's current data. So I simply have a spreadsheet and I just subtracted one from the other. And I'll only show this to you for a second because this is confusing. So this is Steamboat at Clean Water Way, and this is about 30 CFS. This is Steamboat at Short Lane, and it's about 10 CFS. So I simply subtracted the 30 from the 10, and there you go. That is the flow at Boynton Slough for this 2 or 3 month period at the end of 2010, of the year 2000. So I'll get rid of the mess and just show you the Boynton Slough. So I show here on this line right here, that's 4 CFS. That's the combined diversion rate that the club has for the Truckee River Right, which is 1 CFS, and the Boynton Slough Right, that's 3 CFS. So that's 4 CFS right there. And this is the flow of Boynton Slough. It really runs between at least 10 to 20 CFS almost all the time, except for when there's a drought. So the question is, if you lost 1 CFS from this average flow, how much is it going to affect the golf course's water right? Well, probably not very much, if at all. The water master is going to put water into the Cochrane ditch anyway, and it's going to come through Virginia Lake and the Glory Hole anyway, because they need to keep Virginia Lake fresh, or at least from getting too bad. So they're always going to flow some water through it. So we're always going to get some of that water anyway. And we asked the water master, if we lost that, would we still have plenty of water? And he said, you probably wouldn't notice the difference. So this is important when it comes to deciding whether or not selling this water right would impact the ability of the golf course to irrigate the golf course. All right, so now I want to just talk a little bit about the conclusions. The golf course hired Michael Stanka's company, Turnip Seed Engineering, to look at how much underground water was available for sale from the golf course. And in a nutshell, I essentially agree with his findings. There might be some slight differences, but for the most part, I agree. What he did to determine the amount of non-supplemental underground water is to, now if you remember, I said supplemental is 2 water rights that share the same place of use. So what he did is he took the place of use map of the surface water here in green and the underground water here in red, and he laid them one on top of another. And he found that there were these little slivers of acreage that were covered by the underground right, but not by the surface water. Well, by definition, that means they're not supplemental and they're standalone water. So he did that, he laid it out in AutoCAD, and he found that there were 15 acres more or less of land that were covered just by groundwater and not surface water. Now the duty is 4 acre-feet per acre, so he found that there were 60 some odd acre-feet of standalone groundwater that the golf course could sell. I did talk to the state engineer about this very matter. He agreed that if that were the case, if those 15 acres were there, that is standalone water and the golf course could sell it. But what he is going to do is go through the process himself and see how many acres they think are standalone. And part of the problem is these were filed 50 years ago. They weren't filed, they didn't use AutoCAD. They practically used a crayon on a piece of paper for some of these places of use, and they're just not that accurate. Just the width of the line itself might be many, many acres. So that there's something that still needs to be looked at. The other thing he looked at was just how much possible supplemental water could we use on the golf course. And he provided this table. And he went through and he looked at, what he did is he opened up Google Earth or some good image into a program, a GIS program, so he could draw polygons around all of the areas of water use. So he found that there was 130 acres of what he called high managed grass, so tee boxes, fairways, greens, and then 16 acres of, call it low managed rough, but still got the same amount of water. Here he calls it 3.5 acre-feet per acre. Then we had some ponds and sand traps and then dirt areas. And he added it all up and he found 165 total acres that could be irrigated on the golf course. Well, if you recall, the groundwater irrigates 203 acres. So on his finding, the difference between the 203 acres and the 165, he found that he came to the conclusion that that's water that could be sold. It's supplemental water, but it could be stripped off and sold. And we also asked the state engineer about that, and he also agreed to get back to us on that. It turns out to be a fair amount of water. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 acre-feet of supplemental water, about 60 acre-feet of standalone groundwater that he felt that the golf course could sell, and that may very well be. Initially, we had heard from other consultants that there wasn't much of a market for supplemental groundwater, but I've actually heard that there is a demand, and I heard it from someone at the state engineer's office, the basin engineer for this basin, that there is a demand, and she's heard people have asked her, where can I get some supplemental groundwater? Now that supplemental water can be used only as a supplemental supply for an equal or senior surface water right. All of the decree waters are going to be senior to what our groundwater is supplemental to, because ours was in 1919, and all the decree rights are prior to 1913 by definition. That's when the state water law really went into effect. So we had several questions. Some of them have been answered. Are the underground rights supplemental to Steamboat Creek, Boynton Slough, or both? And we have differing opinions from the state engineer's office. In 1992, a deputy state engineer said that the underground rights were only supplemental to Steamboat Creek. And because of that, there would be 66 acres, that is 265 acre-feet of primary groundwater, because our groundwater was 203 acres. Steamboat is only 137 acres, and the difference would be, by definition, standalone groundwater. She wrote that in an opinion and provided it to the golf club, and we have that. And we asked the state engineer, you know, Jason, you know, we have this opinion, you know, you got to tell us if this is true or not. If this is the case, then there's a lot of standalone groundwater that can be sold. But we have another opinion from just 10 years ago by Malcolm Wilson, who's a senior supervisor engineer, and he came to the conclusion that our groundwater is supplemental to both Steamboat Creek and Boynton Slough. In other words, you wouldn't have the 66 acres of primary groundwater. But the other thing was, well, if it's supplemental to both of those, maybe we can just sell Steamboat Creek and just be done with it. The steamboats, we don't use it. The water quality is too poor. We don't use it at all. And we asked him that, and he did not say, well, this is how I would rule, but we clearly got the impression that he didn't think it would fly. He just didn't think it would fly. Would he balk at allowing us to strip that standalone underground the way Michael Stanka did, those little slivers of land? He said, that's not a problem. Whether it's really 15 acres or not is the question, and they're going to go through the exercise. And then we also asked him to comment on the rest of his conclusions about how one would strip off supplemental rights and then ultimately make them available for sale. So, considerations, suggestions. The Truckee River rights clearly can be separated from the golf course without any harm to any other of our water rights. They are the most senior right, and they are probably the most valuable. Selling or trading these rights for, say, a guaranteed effluent drought supply, that's a possibility. We'd need to talk to Tumwa. It's an interesting, in talking to the water master, Tumwa is really responsible for distributing or selling the effluent, to my knowledge, although I'm not an expert on that. But Tumwa owns a lot of storage rights in the mountains that they only use in the case of a drought. There's a fixed supply of effluent, and there is a demand for it, but nevertheless there is still some extra. But in drought years, there's actually more effluent because they have water that they use, and there is no commitment to put that back in the Truckee River. Currently, all of the Truckee River water that gets used and sent to the treatment plant, all of it has to go back in the Truckee River. The only effluent that can be used is groundwater that gets to the treatment plant. So anyway, it was interesting. It offers some possibilities for, how might one structure a deal to basically just use that effluent in drought years. And, that would be certainly less costly than using it on a daily basis. And then obviously look into selling both the supplemental and the non-supplemental underground rights. We talked a little bit internally about the issue of treating groundwater. Keith said that he looked into it some time ago and it was going to cost $1 million. He didn't know what the operating costs might be, and then he was concerned that you'd have boron at the end of the process, and that's a hazardous waste, and how do you dispose of it? I just think that maybe you should take another look at it. Technology changes pretty rapidly, and maybe if you generated a lot of capital through the sale of a water right, that might be something that the club could afford. If you could treat your groundwater, that would drought-proof the golf course forever. That would absolutely work. Then also, maybe you could move those water rights back over towards Longley Lane, the groundwater rights. Find a place where you can drill a well. Find a well where you can put your water rights in. It's a better water quality there. It's close to the Boynton Slough. You pipe it into the Boynton Slough like the club tried to do in the 90s, and then you have it available in times of drought. And then, the very last thing is the legal aspect. The water business is very litigious these days. People are suing people over any amount of water. Transactions involving the Truckee River right, they occur in this valley every day, and they're not going to. Very unlikely that they'd be challenged, and if they were, the challenge probably would not stand up in court. Those changes happen all of the time. That's how Tumwa gets its water. Any of the other rights, it's less certain. For instance, the Steamboat Creek, if we were to sell the Steamboat Creek right to somebody and they were going to divert it, say, up around, Steamboat and use the water up there, downstream users will argue, well, wait a second, you've had that right for 99 years and never used a drop of it, and all of a sudden you're going to sell it and somebody's going to use it, and that will result in less water in the Truckee River and less water that they would see at their senior right downstream. So that's an argument that's made successfully sometimes, and also the state engineer considers that in whether or not to grant change applications. So that's it. That's all I have, but I'll be happy to take any questions that you have.
Do you know the market rate for some of the rides that we might sell?
The market?
Market rate.
I do not.
Thank you, Rick, for his research.
Thank you. Everybody's got a headache now.
I think the only headache everybody's got is from the squiggly lines. We're so grateful for Rick's willingness to enter into the research, and I think you can see all the work that he's done, and his expertise is extraordinary. And frankly, is another example of when we reach out to our members who have expertise in different areas, it's amazing what we can accomplish and how we can better inform ourselves. One thing is a takeaway for me. If you don't sell anything, don't leave Hidden Valley Country Club because your membership is worth a hell of a lot if all you look at is the water itself. You asked about value, Sandy. We have ranges on the Truckee River water rights of somewhere between $1 million and $2.5 million. Anything approaching those kinds of figures would be a major cure to the club's capital issues that we have, and this is why this issue is being reviewed. When Rick agreed to do this research, he's met, as you can see, with the State Engineer's Office, with the Federal Water Master, and so forth. I asked him to join the Strategic Planning Committee, which he agreed to do, because obviously a key component of the Strategic Planning Committee's effort is to understand a water plan for the course, and I mean a full water plan. I think first and foremost, we want the course water, we want it drought-proof, and then you look at what comes next. And so those are the priorities, and as you can see, there's several questions that need to be addressed by the State Engineer's Office, and we're in the process of getting some of those questions addressed. Yes, ma'am?
Is there any timeline for this?
Yes.
Is this going to be a long process?
No. As past presidents and boards will tell you, they've looked at Hidden Valley's water rights for years. And one of the things that I have urged this board to do and the Strategic Planning Committee has agreed to do is to bring this to a head one way or another. And that doesn't mean, be arbitrary or capricious about the decision making. It means make informed decisions about what we have. And this is a major example of a significant asset that belongs to the club, and understanding what that asset consists of, how it should be used, and how it should be used in the future is part of what the Planning Committee is doing. So we're attempting to draw some conclusions and make recommendations to the club by April of next year. That's our time.
Okay, so you expect the questions that have been asked of the various entities to get back to us on their rulings?
Well, they're not official rulings, they're somewhat informal rulings, but principally the State Engineer's Office, and if so I don't know how long it's going to take them, for example, to remap the potential underground areas that you saw outside of that, but it won't take longer than our timeline, certainly. Would you agree with that, Rick?
Yeah, in fact, the state engineer is going to retire in a month, and he promised that he would respond to us before then.
Dawn?
on him? Is that more or less a binding response? Or
On
is
him.
it an arbitrary,
On him, but as with any transactions, water transactions, as Rick noted, some of them can be contested. Some of them can be the process of an administrative hearing. But you saw the earlier memos written by staff. Those are important. The one in particular is very important. I mean, that could be a really significant memo. If the state engineer agrees with that 1982 memo, was it, Rick, I think? That would be dramatic in terms of the impact of that underground water. So we'll have quite a bit of information available to us soon from the state engineer. And I think that'll help guide our deliberations. Yes, sir.
Couple of those memos were from the actually about one issue, and they were opposing memos. So how do you get that?
That's why you go to the state, that's why you go to their boss and ask him to resolve it. That's what he's doing. Go ahead.
Thank you. There was a mention that we lost some rights by, I don't know how, but why weren't we aware of it, or?
Our research shows that apparently there was, and I'll let Mike speak to this, but I believe, if he wants to, but I believe that in June or July of 2016, there are board minutes showing that the course was notified of the forfeiture. The board recounts in the board minutes that we were notified of the forfeiture. I don't know what prior notices existed, but it would appear there weren't any. But I'm not sure about that yet. But to the point that came out at a town hall meeting when the first of the four that we've been involved in, there was a question about, can you lose your water rights? Well, as Rick has pointed out, use it or lose it. And in this instance, this perfected water right originated with a well that had been covered up by a house. So the water had not been used for an extended period of time. The deadline was 2012. The state engineer eventually caught up with us. It's my impression, Rick, I'd like you to weigh in on this if you have a point of view, but it is my impression that the state engineer is going through a lot of the state's water rights to determine whether they're in compliance or not, and taking action, at least insofar as notice, that people need to be aware that their water rights may have a problem.
So at about the time, around 2010, 2012, the state engineer made a concerted effort to clean up the books and to forfeit waters that hadn't been used in a very long time. And this club's water rights fell into that category. At the time, he was not required by law to send us a letter saying, you've got a year to fix it. He wasn't required. He just forfeited it, and that's what he did. Currently, any water rights can't be forfeited without sending a letter and giving the parties an opportunity to fix it before they're forfeited.
So the Strategic Planning Committee's plan is to have as part of our plan a water plan that'll be, as I mentioned, hopefully ready to discuss with the membership in April or early May. So unless there are any other questions for Rick on the water rights, let me just end our meeting with where we are with respect to the strategic planning effort. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Uniquely, since we have the two of you present, just returning to the subject of those abandoned water rights, is there material or significant value there, or was there, and is there a legal process? It sounds like people can go back. You talked about the farmer with the casing that was 60 years old. Would there be any reason for us to invest resources going back to try to get that abandonment overturned? If it's not possible, then moot point. If it is possible, then is it something we at least ought to look at?
Yeah, so those are the forfeited rights, the not abandoned, forfeited, and the time frame for an appeal is passed, so they're not.
This is one of those situations where she's forfeited and the challenge period is over.
Thank you.
So it would be a waste of resources to try to chase that. Yes.
You mentioned that one of the requirements of this plan is that it's got to be drought-proof. In our homeowners association, we spent a lot of money to take advantage of some water rights we had on the Steamboat. We went through those 3 years of drought. And every single one of those years, we pumped less than 10% of what our water rights would have given us. So my experience is you can lose surface water rights very easily in a prolonged drought. So what is your definition of a drought, and how long could we continue to water the course of it, when 5 or 10 years?
I'll let Rick address that, but I think his map was illustrative. That's why he calculated the 4 CFS in order to show you that. And as I read the map, there's only 1 year where you drop below the line in a 20 or 18-year period.
So that's exactly right. This is Boynton Slough, not Steamboat, and Boynton has much more water than Steamboat. But we only ran out here in 2015. It was short in 2014, but we ran out in 2015, and that was a period when the golf course had to use groundwater to supplement the lack of surface water. So this is pretty accurate in terms of, is there enough water to meet the golf course's diversion rate?
But that was just a 3-year drought. Wouldn't you expect we're eventually going to have a 5 or 6 or 7 or more?
So that was a 4-year drought, and it ended in 2015, and 2015 was a huge year, but that was a very significant and deep drought. Those 4 years were among the driest 4-year periods that we've had in this area since record keeping began. But nevertheless, you're right, there could be a 7-year drought, and then what? Well, then you need to have another supply that's going to irrigate the golf course, whether it be effluent or groundwater. You're going to need something.
And that's part of the discussion, and thank you for the question. When we talk about drought-proof, we're talking about having enough water in reserve to cover ourselves for a drought period, and that's a decision we'll all have to make. But I think at the end of the day, whether it's 4 years, 7 years, 8 years, what this study has demonstrated, at least for me, is that there are significant assets available to the club that would not be needed in any of those scenarios. And so the question then is, what do you do? I would sure hate for any of us, and we're not going to lose Truckee River rights, but I would hate for any of us to be in a position 20 years from now and say we forfeited rights for non-use. Let's examine this asset and see how best to use it. There's always this belief, and rightfully so, you never sell your water rights because you can't get them back. Well, that may be the case, but you can sell water rights if they're not needed. And that's why the calculation by Stanko is so important. How many acre feet do we actually have to water? And we do have excess water in that regard. I think Rick, when he looked at that calculation, had some reservations about it. I think he may still have some reservations about it. 165 acre feet might be a little short, so we might want to bump that up so we've got some more protection. But those of you who've been stuck in water-laden sand traps would probably be happy if there was no water in the sand traps. The Staker report wouldn't have us not watering the sand traps. Okay, so are there any other questions? Yes, sir. Underground, that's the quality of the water.
Underground.
Yeah.
Not just-
No. That's the one that we're getting out of the well here. Yes, sir. Fred.
Was 2015, was that drier than the 91, 94 drought period?
I don't know.
I believe it was drier. I really do. They're both pretty deep, but that one 4-year period prior to 2015 was just bone dry. It was really, really dry.
Hey, Rick, if I remember correctly, and I'm sure somebody knows, in 2015, they rebuilt Virginia Lake's glory hole, because I live right on the Boynton Slough, and the water dropped significantly that summer. Due to the construction, there was no flow through the glory hole. So it must have been supplement other water rights that come from Longley and McCarran that fed the Boynton Slough that summer, because I think the glory hole was shut off for the summer.
Yeah, so the Boynton Slough gets water from the groundwater. There's so many drains and canals in this part of the valley that it just gets water from a lot of different sources. And so even though only one CFS was diverted directly into it, it had a lot more water into it. And at that period of time, there was probably no diversion into Virginia Lake because that water right was out of priority. They didn't have enough water. So nobody was getting their water that year. So we just got the drain that made its way down to the Boynton Slough, and eventually it drained all of it and it dried up.
Ready?
Isn't it, Rick, true that we are drought proof right now with our backup well that we have? But that what I've been told in the past is that when the Truckee River goes, when they cut the supply from the Truckee River off, they cut that off long before Boyden or Steamboat goes dry. So the first one to go dry, it would be the Cochran Ditch, correct?
So the question was what happens first, and so there's only 1 cubic feet per second that's really contributing to our part of the Boynton Slough, but we see here it's flowing 20 CFS. So where's the rest of that water coming from? The water's getting spread out across the valley all of the time, and it just makes its way from the aquifer back into these deep drains, and it's just a very slow process. So if you turned off the Truckee River diversion, you're still going to have water in the Boynton Slough for a long period of time, probably a couple of years at least, before it finally got so low that it's not going to meet our demand.
And then with regards to our backup water source to drought proofless, the problem that we have is that our well pumps 20 part per million boron, and the ideal level is 2 or less. And that's our problem, is that we are, in a sense, drought proof, but we're going to poison our golf course with that water that we use.
Right.
Right. So, yes, sir.
If they're looking to take the water rights away, how much are they looking to take away?
We're not under threat of having anybody take our water rights away from us today or in the foreseeable future. And I'll say foreseeable, certainly within the next year or two. But that's why it's so important that we get this plan in place so that we're prepared for that, and that we've already had these conversations with the state engineer's office and we get his views about competing memos in his own office, things like that. So that's why planning is so critical, and we'll be able to better answer some of these questions in the next few months. Yes, ma'am.
Will that plan include a new well?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Not based on my impression of where we are today, but we haven't answered all these questions yet. But I don't think so. Yes. No, that said, I would love to go back to where we were in the 90s. When I was on the board, we were some of you may remember. We put that well out there, and we rented that well from the airport authority at $200 a month. It was the best water in the world. It was cleanest, it was clear, and it was dumping down the Boynton Slough, and it was perfect. But then we got booted out of there. In order to preserve the water right, we had to move that certificate to the course, and we ended up with very low quality water rights as a result of it. Yes.
If we had been on top of it with these water rights that we lost, is there an estimate of how much money we have lost, so should we have been more aware of it, or did we?
We haven't undertaken that investigation yet. Yes.
Can the bond be mitigated?
I think that's what what Rick was talking about, and I don't think so successfully. Now, he has recommended exploring new technology, and certainly that'll be part of the water use plan for the course. That's a segment of the strategic plan. Water is a key part of that, and that'll be one of the things that we take a look at. But if it were $1 million and the operating costs were X, we have neither one, so we need to look at alternatives. Yeah. Tom?
Is it possible to use the effluent from the sewage treatment plant? Could that be pumped to the course?
It is an option, Tom, especially now that we know a little bit more about our water rights and what we can negotiate with. It isn't just a matter of selling them, but some of them may be useful in negotiating with the city and Tumwa to be able to access that. There's considerations that have to be given there. How does that water affect the golf course? And so we need to do some additional studying there too. Is that water quality going to be something that we want to put on the course, and how would it affect the grass and so forth? And I get competing views right now among members on our committee and people who have dealt with this, so I don't know.
Let's walk down to LA, we did go that way. Except for the green, it worked perfectly.
Yeah.
Now, here again, I'm not sure what their quality, comparable or such, but down there, it was.
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about what's the nitrate content, you're talking about the heat and so forth, and there's all this that has to be taken into consideration, and that's part of the study. A couple of other things. I'll say this, and I shouldn't have to. Nobody's selling your water rights without you having a chance to vote on it. Okay, so don't get all excited. Nobody's selling water rights tomorrow. It's not happening. But it is important for our membership to be educated about this asset. Because if there is a point, and our committee has already recommended to the board that they do this, the board has considered it, there is a point, I think, where there'll be a resolution tendered to the membership to look at that. And the best way for you to exercise your right to vote is to educate yourself about this subject, and that's why we're very blessed to have Rick on board and having him do the research he's done. And I want to thank him very much for his time. Next Monday night, we're going to talk about the strategic planning process. And so I want to alert you that I'm hopeful by Thursday or Friday, you will receive the member survey. The committee members have taken the survey. I think all of them have finished. I don't know if Rick got it. He was supposed to. He may have not taken it yet, but everybody else has, I believe. And it's pretty smooth. What'll happen is this. For those of you who have an account with Hidden Valley and an email account with Hidden Valley, you're going to get a push-out notice from the club. And it's going to say Hidden Valley Country Club membership survey, and there'll be some language at the beginning that describes the survey and the background for the strategic planning committee, and then you push a button and you start. And you just go through and answer the questions, and at the end, you're going to have some blocks where you can type in there comments that you might wish to make about the club and its future. And then you hit submit, and we're in a position then to tabulate the results. Now, for people who do not have an account, or perhaps significant others as an example, you need to call the office and get an account set up. It's just that simple. So it's as simple as getting your email account set up with the club so that you can participate in the survey. And we're able daily to check on how many of you responded. And so Jennifer is sending me emails, and will be sending me emails daily on how many members have responded. And if we don't get a bunch of responses, we're going to start calling you and reminding you to take the survey. Committee members, Kathy, Jim, how long did it take you to take the survey?
15 minutes.
15.
Okay. Randy took 20, he's a little slow. Or he was more thoughtful, in fairness to Randy. Yes, ma'am.
At the last meeting, there were a couple of people who don't have email, don't have a computer.
Right.
Are you still going to be sending out the
Yeah.
hard copy to these people?
Yes, if you call the office and we're going to notify everybody through an email, but we're also going to reach out to folks if they don't have a computer or online access, we will do that. We'll provide a hard copy, and the hard copy will be delivered to the club in the same way that your ballot is delivered. So it's still confidential. We won't know that it's your name on the survey. And by the way, even though we know you've responded, we don't know that the responses are Dr. Marshall's responses. We just know that Dr. Marshall responded. Right, John, you're going to respond? Any questions for me about that? So, I'm asking people to try to get your survey responses in by the end of the year. It'd be a big help to the committee. And then we'll start, after the first of the year, we'll start focus groups. So that's the process. Any other questions? Great, have a good evening.